Hi, folks, and welcome to another episode of Careers and Coffee. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Angela Ransby, who is the CEO of the Radwell Trust. And I'm also going to be joined by Andy Green, who's the principal of Copleston High School. These are two fantastic leaders in education here in Suffolk, and they're going to share an insight into the world of education, their careers in education. And let's be joined by the two guests. It's going to be fantastic. Folks, how are we doing?
Brilliant. We're living the dream.
This is what I like. So, where are you? Are you at school? Are you at home? Whereabouts in the world are you?
So, certainly for me, I'm in an office at home at the moment. So, started the day at home, went into one of our schools, came back, going back in this afternoon. So, it's a fairly sort of mobile role.
Awesome. And Andy, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'm actually at home today, Jordan. I'm on paternity leave this week, as I think you know, but obviously never one to let you down. I'm here in the office, ready to go.
And I was going to say, you're both looking very smart today. I mean, Andy's full suit and boots. I mean, I come on here looking sort of like a Simon Cowell tribute act. But I mean, it's brilliant to have you both on. And I'll also come clean. I'm obviously one of the governors at Copleston, where Andy is principal. I mean, why don't we kick off? Tell me a little bit about yourselves and what you currently do. So let's kick off with Angela.
So I'm the CEO of the Radwell Trust. The Radwell Trust is a multi-academy trust of alternative provisions. So we're Suffolk-based. We have 6 schools spanning 11 sites, and all of our children need sort of additional support to succeed in education. And so some of their barriers to accessing education are trauma, our medical needs, are behavior challenge or behaviors that present challenge to adults. So it's a fairly diverse role that I have at the moment. I've been doing it for a couple of years in Ipswich. Prior to that was in hospital education, alternative provision for children with behaviour needs. Specifically before that, overseas before that, mainstream education before that. So that's sort of the potted version, of fairly sort of a spiky profile to reach the dizzy heights that I now sit in.
Fantastic, thank you, Angela. And over to Andy. So, what's your background and what do you currently do?
Well, so I'm currently principal at Copleston High School. My background, Jordan, is I've been in various different schools. So I've taught at Leiston in Suffolk. I've taught at Thorpe St Andrew in Norwich, Norfolk. I came to Copleston in 2010 as vice principal. Was head of school there for a few years, and a couple of years ago was fortunate enough to secure the post as principal there. Copleston is obviously a large school, nearly 1,900 youngsters now, a growing and successful sixth form as well. So that's kind of my background. My background has generally been more pastoral. So I've been a head of year, I've been a head of key stage. So that's been kind of my background, really, and that's been my route to headship.
Fantastic. And Andy, what does, I suppose, sort of an average day look like for you?
An average day for me, right? Okay. Well, I mean, I'll give you the honest answer. The average day is get up pretty early, sort the kids out with my wife, make sure they're, everybody's up and dressed and ready for school, and, doing all the normal jobs that anybody else has to do. Occasionally early in the morning, do a breakfast club run before getting into school, making sure that things like PE kits and what have you have been remembered. And then you get into work. By which stage I'll have probably also, while at home in the morning, checked all my emails from the night before. I'll get into work. I'll perhaps have an early morning meeting with SMT. I'll perhaps check a few more emails and make sure that I've done any jobs that need to be done first thing. I'll go out and I'll do duty in my designated duty spot in the morning. I may then have a range of meetings in the day. I'll certainly do a lot of learning walks around the school. I do that constantly in and out of classrooms. I kind of think that's an important role for a head. Anything could crop up at any time during the day, as people will know. So I could have to respond to a staffing issue or a parent issue or a particular issue that's cropped up within the school. And then obviously, the end of the day, it could be meetings with SMT, or it could be meetings with heads of department. That could be at the moment more likely via Teams than anything else. And then, of course, it's back to family life. It's all the normal jobs, Jordan. It's the making of the packed lunches, and it's the dinners, and it's the clubs in the evening for the children. And myself and my wife will share that responsibility. And then it's probably checking work again and responding to emails and making sure that nothing's been missed. And then you kind of go to bed at about 10:30, 11:15, and then you get up and do it all again.
Flat out then. I mean, Angela, I'm seeing sort of a lot of nods from your end there. Is it a similar sort of scene?
It's a really similar scene. I mean, I am the pedant of lists, I suppose. So I end every day with a very clear set of lists of what needs to be achieved kind of by particular times of priorities through the next day. And then I weave throughout the day things that are arising, I suppose. So it's the balance of one's time against what one can foresee will happen, and then to be available for what's sort of emergency. But I mean, school leadership in whatever form that is undoubtedly not a job. It is absolutely a vocation, and so it's an identity, I suppose. So whilst I think there are routines and rhythms that one could parameter by times of the day, like I work at this time and not at this time, one is working all of the time. And if that working is that kind of thinking or networking or sounding out other colleagues in the area, Andy and I sort of talk fairly frequently about challenge, asking each other views or decisions we've made to check that that's okay, or and that's not sort of trying to be a martyr about that. That is part of the deal. It is a vocation. It's an identity. It's an important role in a community, isn't it? You have a responsibility to make sure that you and your organization positively impacts children, and that is difficult to do on an hourly rate.
I can imagine. And also, I forgot to ask this at the start, but have we all got beverages? We need the good stuff.
You see, I finished mine in the preparation.
All right. Well, at least you started the right way. Obviously, given COVID and the impact on education, it has been, I think, probably mammoth, to probably say the least. Angela, how have things had to adapt and change for you folks over at Radwell Trust?
I mean, we had to at the beginning of lockdown. Anyway, our children receive a really intensive wraparound education. Our commitment to sort of children and families is probably more time consuming and deeper than one might typically expect in other sectors of education. So we have teams of people that work with families specifically, and our education is often not classroom bound, and so it's in homes and around. So what COVID-19 has done for us has meant that certainly during lockdown period, what was that sort of family community work came to the fore in a much stronger and more visible way, I suppose. So it intensified for our teams. We didn't close, and we did continue to see children. So we saw children in their home, at the door, on the doorstep. We did a range of things, and some children also coming onto site. But because all of our typical routines and rhythms and processes to operate a complex organisation became much more fluid and much less predictable, it put everybody in the organisation in an emergency procedure kind of mentality, actually, I think. And so the burden of responsibility and the anxiety of delivering emergency response education and social care and support is not to be underestimated. It's the successes, however one defines that, and that's not clear yet how I think one would define that, are not easily won or indeed easily sustained.
That's understandable. Thank you for that. And Andy, what's it been like having 1,900 pupils to try and educate digitally and then bringing them all back into school, making sure they're safe and sound?
Well, it's been very challenging, I think, would be the first thing to say. I mean, we, from the start, I don't suppose any school got it completely right, but we, from the start, kind of foresaw that when the lockdown happened late March the 22nd, 23rd, whenever that was, we foresaw that it was going to be for the long term. I don't think we thought at Copleston that it was going to be a couple of months and then back to school, or a month and then back to school. So we very quickly repurposed our workforce. We very quickly, with some very talented senior leaders that I've got, created a remote learning platform that worked well. We bought mobile phones for key staff so that we could be in regular contact with students and check A, that they were okay, and B, support the parents in making sure that the students were doing the work that they needed to be doing in order to try and ensure that the gap didn't widen. That's not to suggest that there hasn't been some lost learning. Of course, I'm sure there has across every school in the country, but we tried to embrace it. We got some funding, and we very quickly bought over 200 laptops and Chromebooks for students that were in need, and gave them out to make sure that, the families that may have had, let's say, 3 or 4 students in the family, but not 3 or 4 laptops. So, some of them were really struggling and having to juggle, digital equipment. So we tried to make it as easy as possible. So we adapted very quickly, and we continued to reflect on it all the way through the process. We made some changes to our timetable to make the timetable work better for teachers and for students and for parents. And in terms of them coming back, well, we had a bit of a trial run in the summer, didn't we, with year 10 coming back in their bubble, alongside the key worker and the vulnerable students that we'd always had. But getting back nearly 1,900 youngsters on a site with well over 2,000 people, when you include staff, is complex. So we've got students in year group bubbles. They're in individual areas of the school. They don't mix. They don't go out for lunch or break. I know some schools do. We've chosen not to, and to reduce that amount of social mixing. They come in, so there's staggered starts and there's staggered finishes, and there's hand sanitizer, quite rightly, absolutely everywhere. In fact, I remember saying to the site team, look, when you put the hand sanitizer up, and I was being absolutely genuine when I said this, I want it to look, in terms of, almost like a hospital, not look like a hospital in terms of the building itself, because I want it to look like a school, but I want it to be as safe in terms of things like hand sanitizer as you would be if you walked through the doors of Ipswich Hospital. And I have to say that our site team were absolutely magnificent in getting everything ready, and as all our team have been.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And we've just got a question in. So just briefly, so what's the best thing about working with students, Angela?
The best thing about working with them is honestly the joy. You can honestly, I can stand in a school with a student, with staff teams, in a moment that there is within that moment nowhere else I'd rather be. And the reason for that is that I absolutely know that when we get it right at the Radwell Trust, when we combine high quality education, high quality aspirations, and mediums and vehicles through which children can succeed, our children life chances change. I mean, I kind of don't know what gets better than that, if I'm truly honest.
That's brilliant, thank you. And I've got a different question for Andy. So I want to rewind the clocks a little bit back to when Mr. Green was back at school. You know, what were you like, and you know, what was careers advice like? You know, did you always think, my aspiration, I'm going to go off and be a principal? Yeah, what was young Andy like?
What was I like? Incredibly passionate about sport, incredibly competitive in terms of sport, and I absolutely loved my sport when I was at school. I think that would probably be one of my most favourite things, and I remain very passionate about that, but also passionate about certain subjects. I became a geography teacher. I loved geography. I loved history. Funnily enough, which kind of goes against the mold, perhaps, for a boy. I liked writing. You know, having said that, I regret saying that to an extent, because I don't really subscribe to the view that boys can't write well. I think boys can write very well. They sometimes just choose not to. But you know, I was very passionate about the humanities and English and things like that, and sport. I worked pretty hard. I was in one of the earliest cohorts for GCSEs. I worked pretty hard for GCSEs. I remember having a little part-time job as well that my dad, quite rightly, had asked me to go out and get. When I say part-time, I mean sort of 16 hours a week. My dad was quite keen for me to go out and earn money and become independent. And I did that while I was doing my GCSEs, and I balanced that with my sport and my schoolwork. When I did my A levels, I have to say I didn't have a part-time job. I gave that up, and I did geography, economics, and history. And for A level in particular, I worked pretty hard, and I will be honest and say and I've always said this, I wasn't the most naturally gifted or bright student, and I don't subscribe to the view that success comes through being naturally gifted. Very often you might get the occasional genius, but you know, most people tend to be successful through dedication and resilience and determination, and you know, learning from failures and things like that. And you know, I absolutely, you know, tried to do that myself. My parents had not been to university. I think they had, you know, a small number of qualifications between them. Neither of them had done A levels. So I was the first member of my family to go on to university. So it was a really steep learning curve. I mean, and I was very lucky. My parents were incredibly supportive and passionate. But yeah, it was, you know, you've got to exhibit, haven't you, which I hopefully did, the characteristics that are required in order to try and be successful. And basically, you know, hard work and determination are pretty important.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Angela, you know, back when you were at school, you know, I'm sure no detentions, turned up on time, homework was always in on time. Was that the case?
So sadly that wasn't the case. I mean, I think that I listened to Andy's kind of story of his perhaps motivation and so on. I mean, I was raised in a family that had a very strong work ethic, but and sort of a pretty strong social conscience. But it was not. I didn't go to school that much, if I'm really honest. I wasn't a problem. I went. I never got kind of into trouble. But at that time, my dad, not. I mean, he won't be listening to this, so that's fine. But he used to work on the docks, Ipswich docks, and so he used to do the shift work. So I knew that if I went to school in the morning and that he'd be on shift, I could go back home and nobody would know. So that was obviously years before attendance was heavily monitored. So I never kind of got into trouble, but I was fairly nonplussed, I think, by school. And that went through to my A levels. So I didn't do brilliantly in either of those, and I kind of coasted. And I think that you know, I remember my parents getting summoned into school to sort of say, if she doesn't, you know, sort it out, then she'll be kicked out of A levels. And so, and I also had jobs. I always had lots of part-time jobs. I loved those jobs. I loved the curiosity of different people, different ways of being, different ways of thinking, and I never kind of got that from school, I think. So so it was both to my surprise and everybody else's when I went to university. My surprise and everybody else's when I, you know, and I think, well, I think even after university that I had the most phenomenal time, really, largely unassociated, if I'm brutally honest, with what I was learning, and more to do with growing up. I then went overseas because I didn't know what else to do, if I'm honest. So I spent a good portion of my life not troubled, but just not really sure what to do with no master plan. So yeah, is that different? I don't know.
No, I think that was good. I never sort of you didn't strike me as someone who'd bunk off during the day, so I've definitely learned something new.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, question for Andy now. Now, Andy, I know that you do assemblies at Coppleston. There'll be best part of 300 kids sat in front of you. I mean, do you get nervous before doing those? And for any student who perhaps does get nervous for those presentations that they have to do in class, what's your advice to them to be able to get up, stand there, and deliver a speech?
I have to say I don't get nervous now, and I don't in the same way that I don't get too nervous speaking in front of parents and staff now. But if you'd have asked me that question several years ago, I might have given you a very different answer. So I think probably the advice I would give the students is the more times you do it and the more times you practice it, the more proficient and confident you get at it. And it kind of ties in with my last answer, really, because there's, again, there's the sort of, there's the theory that, aren't some people wonderful public speakers, but you'd be surprised how hard the people practice who happen to be wonderful public speakers. They practice that speech and they make sure that they've got their presentation absolutely right in their mind. They know exactly, even when you listen to kind of people on television, when they, and they might be, telling a story and they'll get their timing right and they'll practice when they're going to, tell a little joke or put a little one-liner in, and it all seems as though it's fairly ad hoc, but you can almost guarantee that it's not ad hoc and that it's been really well practiced. So, that would be my kind of advice to students, whether that's preparing for interviews at, for university or for jobs or anything else. Think about the sort of questions they might ask you. Practice in your own mind how you would respond to that question, and be really, really well prepared. That would be my advice.
Brilliant, thank you. You talk about jobs and sort of employability there. With everything that's going on, there's naturally a reshuffle in priorities for schools. How much of a priority is careers and careers education at your schools moving forwards? And I'll go to Angela for that one.
Yeah, it's defining for us. I mean, it's something that to be able to sort of work with our students and to make sure that they are as equipped and their families as possible about the range of options that are available to them, that the range of possibilities and the control that they can have over their life through good future planning, of which careers is part, isn't it? Is a golden thread running through our organization, actually. So we invest considerable time talking to students about what they want to do, taking them through a range of experiences, meeting different people. And because many of our students have experienced some degree of failure, they have have perhaps lost their ability to dream and believe that it's possible that they can be whatever they want to be, and that there's a pathway through that. And so I think it's all the more crucial for us to make sure that we kind of keep that alive for them, and that we're part of that sort of their extended family, really, of advising, supporting, networking, connecting. And also, a little bit like me, is that it kind of doesn't matter really what happened before. It's now, and who are you now, and what do you want to be now? Is yesterday? It's done. It's done. What is it now?
That's brilliant advice. Thank you. And Andy, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, well, the school very well, Jordan. I mean, careers is extremely important at Coppleston, and whilst I don't think that it's a requirement for a student aged 15, 16, 17, 18 to know what career they want to do, I think what is really important is for them to know what options are available to them. So if I go and do this as a degree, or if I take these A levels, where might this take me? What sort of jobs are going to be available to me? And I think probably, and you asked me, about careers advice when I was at school. Well, obviously, when I was at school, websites and and all of the stuff that's available now didn't exist. But the careers advice was average. I think is a fair comment. And I think if students are if they're motivated because they think, I could do any one of a number of these jobs, and yes, I've got the ability, and actually if I work really hard and I get these qualifications, it might lead me down one of these many different routes that I could explore, then I think that's incredibly that's a real motivator for students. And excuse me, a hugely important part of a school. So at Coppleston, massive focus on employer engagement and IAG. So we're a member of the Suffolk Chamber. We do a lot of work with the Suffolk Chamber. We do a lot of work with the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership. We're I think the only school in Ipswich, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jordan, to have all of the Gatsby benchmarks. But we're still looking to do more. And even at the moment, a big dialogue at the moment about what's work experience going to look like, and how are we going to do it virtually, and what experiences are we going to give to students who can't go out on work experience because of COVID, in order to motivate them and in order for them to see and build the self-esteem to be able to see where they might be able to go with their lives. So yeah, hugely important in my view.
Excellent. That was really, really good to hear. Okay, let's just briefly tackle this one, then I want to come on to some new issues. So what has been one of your funniest moments working in education? Who wants to kick off with that? Andy?
I knew you were going to ask me. But do you know what I'm going to ask? I'm going to answer this, and it's going to sound like a bit of a cop-out, and it's not a cop-out. I can't really pull out one funny moment, because what I'll say is this: if you go to work every day and you can't have a good laugh, with staff, and you can't really enjoy, we have there's a lot of good humoured banter amongst our staff. We all get on pretty well. Of course, at times we'll thrash things out and we'll disagree, and we'll do that in a professional way. But if a workplace, and I've always believed this, can't be funny and humorous as well as being professional and hardworking and all of those things, then I think, particularly if you're going to be in education for 40 years, that's going to be 40 pretty long years if there's no fun and no laughs to be had. So I couldn't pick out one particular moment. We've all done funny things. I can remember teaching a geography lesson and sitting on a chair in front of a class, and it collapsed and I ended up on my backside, and the class thought it was great in my early years of teaching, and all of those sorts of things that we've all done at various different stages. But in terms of kind of fun and laughter and humour, I just think that's an integral part of a school, and certainly an integral part of any successful school that I've been to. They've got a number of things in common, but there's certainly places where they're enjoyable and fun places to work.
And Angela, it must be quite a laugh working with Andy time to time.
So I think that, I would echo what Andy said, actually, to be honest. It is, when things are very, very difficult or very challenging, or things are very dark, or equally very light, and you have kind of amazing experiences with people, don't you? You're part of a community, truly part of a community that everybody is invested in, a kind of collective positivity, and so it is fun. Even when it looks from the outside like it might not be. It's that, it's that connection creates relationships between adults, children, families, adults, all of that is what's your funniest moment in a family, what's your funniest moment in a community. I mean, I think, I think like Andy, we all have that. I remember you were talking about assemblies. One of my first assemblies, I, put on what my niece would call my trollop trotters, which are my assembly shoes, that walked down the assembly hall, and they went from under me. Now, it was mortifying, wasn't it? My first year 11 assembly, as head of year 11 on a parquet floor, flat on my rear end. It wasn't my funniest moment, but it certainly, I think, was one of the ones that they will recall. So but this is just human relationship, isn't it? And I think schools and education communities, even though they are under extraordinary pressure, are communities where there is lightness and positivity and humor and real joy, actually, real joy.
Yeah, I think it gets you through the days. I can tell you one of my funniest moments at Coppleton as a governor is I was sat in reception, and then one of the sixth formers thought I was a sixth former as well. That was, and then I was then in a conversation trying to prove that I wasn't a sixth former because she thought I was now off on work experience because I was in a suit and tie. So I think we've all got some interesting stories.
Indeed.
What I do want to come on to though is some of the fantastic work that you've both been doing and have been a champion long before people saw it as some sort of trend, and that's from the killing of George Floyd earlier this year and the huge movement around Black Lives Matter, equality, race, and I think the disparity there, and it can be felt quite a lot in a education setting from all levels, both whether it be staff, whether it be how the teaching is delivered, and of course with the students there. So I want to sort of leave this as sort of bit of an open forum for you both to discuss both some of the sort of, I know you've done some partnership working, but also some things that individual schools have been doing moving forward. So Andy, do you want to kick us off on
that? I mean, yeah. As a school, we've done a lot around and have been doing it for a long while around the whole equality and diversity agenda. You'll find that message in what we send out to parents. You'll find that message around the school when you look at visual images. You'll hopefully find that message embedded within our curriculum. And you'll find that message in the aspirations that we have for every single student from whatever background they come from. And we have very high aspirations for all students at Copleston. We don't label students. I'm very anti-labeling, actually, incredibly anti-labeling, and I don't want to really or need to know whether a student comes from a Bangladeshi background or an Indian background or a mixed Caribbean background or a Black African background or a white British background. To me, that isn't really the point. The point is we don't label any students as potentially likely to underachieve. We don't label any students as potentially likely to overachieve. We have incredibly high aspirations for all students, and as a result of that at Copleston, and of course we're seeking to improve all the time, so don't let me kind of give anybody the impression that we're the finished article. We're nothing like the finished article, but as a result of that, we tend to do well with the subgroups of students that come to our school, and I think part of that is the anti-labeling culture that we've had for a considerable amount of time. In terms of driving forward the equality agenda, I mean, it's a big issue, isn't it? It's far bigger than the likes of Angela or I can articulate in the course of an interview. But all I can say is that it's something that's very close to the Trust's heart. Our chair of Trust, Bob Wade, who used to also sit on the National Equality Working Group, has set up an equality working group at Copleston across the trust, across Gipswick Trust. Various members of staff at various, in various different positions are sitting on that equality working group and governors in order to continue to try and drive forward the equality agenda, and in all its guises, whether that is looking at sexual equality, looking at racial equality, whatever that may be. So it's a big focus at Copleston, and we acknowledge that schools, if you like, are a driver for change in wider society, and I think it's important that schools absolutely grasp hold of the equality agenda and look to drive that forward in a really positive way. And they have a kind of and they should want to do it anyway. But they have a moral obligation, in my view, to do that, and that's certainly how the staff feel. At Coppleston, we did quite a lot of training. We've done some joint training with the Radwell Trust as well, specifically in the summer term around the issues of race and education and unconscious bias and things like that, in order to raise staff awareness as well. So yeah, lots going on, and probably I'll pass over to Angela.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, all of what Andy says. I mean, I think that it's for the Radwell Trust. We've been part of, and this was out of a conversation of one of the conversations that Andy and I had, about what's coming out and how are we doing the right thing with children and schools and so on, as part of our general kind of peer support and challenge, really. But Andy was saying, what are we doing about the Black Lives Matter movement? What are you doing? Damn it. Okay, so how do we make sure that the Radwell Trust, Ipswich, and that our area is actively engaged with in a moment of seminal change, and I mean actively engaged in that. So I like Andy, believe very strongly that schools have a moral obligation and imperative to set a standard of equality and to have a deep knowledge of equality, because that is their responsibility to children that they have the privilege of working with, and that's their public duty and responsibility. But also, I believe that we have to have the courage to be part of the seminal change that is happening as a result of the Black Lives Matter agenda. And even though that is politically, I don't know, maybe uncharted territory, it's not partisan, it's a political topic. People have a lot of views on whether it should be discussed or not in schools, labelled and all the rest of it. And I do feel very, very strongly that we should. So, for example, at the moment, there's a network established to launch a campaign that's sitting around the hashtag Silence is Compliance. And so that will be a range of activities across a number of schools in the area to get that. That's part of the Black Lives Matter approach to enabling children to explore those issues of identity and what it means to everyone's collective responsibility to address what has been and continues to be a significant disadvantage to Black children and people, So I think there is something around the Black story and the Black history that separates it from the equality agenda right now, and I think that's correct.
Brilliant. Thank you both for that. And I think we'll just sort of sum up probably on this question. So what would you say to a school where careers education is no longer a top priority, and in the main, has it been put on hold due to COVID? I know we've already sort of touched on that, but any school who's thinking, now we're going to knock this, we're not going to do it, just quickly, what would you suggest to them?
Do you want me to answer that first, Jordan? Or
yeah, please. Yeah.
I mean, I think you could kind of apply that question to a range of different things, couldn't you? For example, in the light of COVID, what about schools and CPD? Or in the light of COVID, what about schools and careers? Or what about schools and after school, revision opportunities? Or that you could go on and on and on. And I think my point would be, COVID's been very difficult, but COVID's also for schools been a learning experience, hasn't it? There's things that we've learned. COVID's not, COVID itself has been a dreadful global pandemic that we're all still, in the midst of dealing with, and we're not through it yet, as we hear, and we've heard again in quite some detail this week. But I guess what we have to consider is, how can we do things differently in the light of COVID, and indeed how might we continue to do things differently, and what might it add in the future, even when we're through the COVID experience? How are we going to do things differently in order to ensure that things continue to happen? Now, there are some superb, and you know this yourself, Jordan, virtual experiences that children and schools can tap into with wonderful films and wonderful presentations around anything to do with careers, whether it's what financial sector, health sector, any sector you care to mention, leisure and tourism sector, stuff on university, stuff on apprenticeships, it's all out there and it's all available. So there's nothing to stop schools having an incredibly streamlined, really well put together careers program that students can tap into, and schools can make sure that they are, in the same way that schools can have fantastic professional development programs for their staff, even if they don't have the opportunity to meet face to face. So I think you have to look at it as an opportunity rather than something that's holding you back, and try and grasp that opportunity and drive things forward.
Excellent, thank you. And a slightly different question for Angela. So, for any aspiring teachers who are watching this, what's your message to those young people around going into education? What should they sort of put in their kit bag to make sure that they're on the right path to be in education?
I think that you've got to truly see it as a vocation. I think you have to understand that you've got to be at the top of your game all of the time, and that you've got to have you have got to have a commitment to the notion that children have my chance to improve when you deliver high quality education and children learn. And so that doesn't mean that you have to be perfect all the time. You're part of a group and a movement of people collectively invested in that. So you are learning all of the time. You feel like an imposter all of the time, but you cannot lose your heart and your commitment to serve children. It is a job that is service, and the higher you go up, the greater the service expectation is, and it's and in your kit bag needs you need to have some resilience, know yourself, commitment to working with people, and sharing that responsibility. But we're public servants, and we must serve, and you must believe that.
That's brilliant. What a way to end. Angela, Andy, thank you so much for coming on Careers and Coffee. It's been...
Thank you.
Thank you. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, Andy. Cheers, Angela. So, folks, that was Andy Green, Principal of Copleston High School and Sixth Form in Ipswich, and Angela Ransby, CEO of Radwell Trust, giving us a fantastic insight into their careers, BAME, Black Lives Matter, BAME, just some really, really interesting insights into their worlds and how it has drastically changed over the last few months, and how they're adapting to it moving forward as well. But also what you need in your kit bag if you are going to be a teacher moving forward. So that was this week's sessions of Careers and Coffee. Our survey, I know it's a survey, it'll take around 20-30 seconds. It just helps myself and Josie plan content for the future. So next week, I'm really, really pleased to be welcoming George Hines. So George works in investments, finance, and that wonderful world. So he's going to come on to talk to us a little bit more about finance and investments and his career doing that. And later in the week, we have on one of our colleagues here at the left, Simon Papworth. So Simon is our economic analyst. So as you can imagine, trying to analyse the economy as it's changing every other second is rather challenging. So we're going to hear from Simon about how he's doing that here at New Anglia Left. So looking forward to seeing you next week at 12:30 till 1 here on New Anglia Left's YouTube channel. Thanks.